appreciate folks tuning in this evening as we officially launch the nonpartisan Vote Safe Columbus campaign. Those of you who work in politics and government know there are no guarantees in the run-up to an election. But one thing we know for sure is that this year, that the 2020 general election will be unlike any we've seen in our community and our nation's history. That's why I'm so appreciative for folks taking the time tonight to learn about the work that we're doing to ensure that all Columbus residents have access to the ballot box. Access that is easy, access that is legal and protective of your rights, and most importantly, access that is safe. Tonight, we'll hear from leaders from organizations across our great city who are helping to ensure that you and I will be able to truly vote safe this fall. We'll hear from the director of the Franklin County Board of Elections, Ed Leonard, as well as representatives from the League of Women Voters, the local branch of the NAACP, the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University, and Pastor Victor Davis of Columbus Trinity Baptist Church. 2020 has been an incredibly difficult year for many in our city and across our nation. A fact that's highlighted by the recent loss of John Lewis, a civil rights icon. He was an icon because he pushed everyone for the right to vote. He asked a very simple question that has a profound impact on our discourse regarding voting rights in America. He would ask, quote, "Would you please let me vote?" That answer should always be yes. Whether those hurdles in front of the right to vote because of racial discrimination or staying safe in the midst of a global pandemic, we'll never have justice in this country until we have full participation in the process for all of our citizens. Rich, poor, those with advanced degrees, those without, black, white, healthy, those with underlying health conditions. That's the challenge. That's why we're all here tonight. Chances are, if you've tuned in, you're familiar with your voting rights. You know how to be heard. You know how to vote regularly, and you have never had trouble registering to vote. There are hundreds of thousands of other Columbus residents who don't yet realize how best to be heard by those elected to lead them. That's why we're here tonight. I hope to share the information you learned here tonight with your friends and your family, but also with anyone you come in contact with who needs this information. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and you'll hear it once, and you'll hear it twice, and several times tonight. Our goal is to vote safe, and vote safe for Columbus. Our first guest is a man with a lot of knowledge about the actual voting process, someone that I'm very excited that is here with us to share a lot of the nuts and bolts of how folks can gain access to the ballot this year and every year, but most importantly in years in which we're dealing with a global pandemic. So with that, I'd like to turn over the mic and welcome the director of the Franklin County Board of Elections, Ed Leonard. Ed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, council member. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you and the folks on the call about some of the important information regarding the elections. I mean, I can't state it any better than you did in terms of the importance of voting this year, and really every year, but particularly when there are local issues on the ballot, as well as when there are questions of national importance. And so, but the first thing we got to do is make sure folks are registered to vote. And the way we do that is, again, because people need to, it's like, well, I'm already registered to vote. It's like, well, they need to update their registration if they've moved or had a name change, experienced a name change since they last voted. And the way they can do that is they can do that online at voteohio.gov. The deadline to register or update your registration is October 5th, Monday, October 5th. And but if they can't do it online or they don't have access to do it online, you always do it the old-fashioned way in terms of getting a form, complete a voter registration form here at our office, or you can contact our office and we can send you one if you aren't able to access one on the internet. And so again, that deadline's October 5th. And encourage folks to update their registration, because again, if you haven't updated your registration, your only option is going to be to vote provisionally. And so you want to make sure, check your registration, check your polling location. But again, go to voteohio.gov and you can do those things. The other thing I wanted to talk about is how to actually vote. There are multiple ways in which to vote. For quite a long time, Ohioans have had three options to vote. in any election. And the first of those is, and the one that's really upon us right now, is voting by mail, because you can make an application for an absentee vote by mail ballot right now. And you can do that by going to our website, completing an online form, printing it, and signing it, and mailing it back to our office. Unfortunately, Ohio doesn't have an online method to request an absentee ballot. We still require a signature, and so that means you have to print it out, sign it, and send it to us, or you can drop it off here at our office. If you again don't have access to be able to print one at home off of the internet, you can always contact our office. We're at 614-525-3100. Once again, that's 614-525-3100, and we'll send you an application in the mail. Officially, the deadline to get those in is October 31st by noon, but obviously we are encouraging people to apply a lot further ahead than that. Actually 10 days before the election, or at least a week before the election, to get that request so that you can have plenty of time for it to be sent to you and for you to send it back to the Board of Elections. The other option to vote early is to vote early at our early vote center. We've made changes at the early vote center to here at 1700 Morris Road. And early vote starts on October 6th and goes through the day before election on October 2nd. And so, again, you can come here to the Board of Elections and cast your ballot. And then, obviously, you always have the option to vote on election day, but we always want to, particularly in this environment, encourage people to vote early, and really vote earlier. And so the earlier you can do it, the better. And so start by getting that absentee ballot application request to us, and your ballot will be amongst the first that gets sent out on October 6th. So, and Rob, I'm talking straight through. I don't know if you want me to pause and get some questions, but I mean, again, those are the three primary ways in which the three options people have. And again, one starts now by requesting in the mail. Another will start October 6th, where they could come here at the early vote center at the Board of Elections, or election day voting. And again, we encourage people to vote early because, as I always say, life happens. You never know. I mean, I know everybody's concerned about, the polls and being open, but you just don't know where your life is going to be. You may at the last minute have a hospitalization. You may have a family member that tests positive, and suddenly you've got a quarantine. And so I just think it's better for folks to make that plan, and the plan should be to vote early and vote safely.
Thanks, Ed. I know you may have to run. Do you have an opportunity to hang out for questions, or would you mind answering a couple right now?
Sure, I can answer a few now. One thing I do want to talk about is just some of the precautions we're taking to ensure that voting is safe. Again, here at the Early Vote Center, we've actually expanded the footprint of the Early Vote Center. So it used to be in a 15,000 square foot space at the Board of Elections. Now we're going to move some operations off site so that the Early Vote Center will actually be 40,000 square feet of space. So the machines will be spread out. The check-in stations will be spread out. We will have personal protective equipment, gloves, masks. So if somebody shows up without a mask, we'll offer them a mask. Again, we'll have shields in front of the check-in stations. We're going to be giving voters a kind of single-use stylus. So almost what I always refer to as an electronic pencil. There we go. And so a voter doesn't have to touch the machine. We'll give them this. They can sign their name on the poll pad. They can make their selections on the electronic voting machine and never have to touch the machine. A very touchless process. And then they could take it with them if they'd like. And so that's one way that we're trying to keep things safe. Again, our folks will have available hand sanitizer, disposable wipes for cleaning equipment, cleaning surfaces. Like I said, the stylus to kind of make it a touchless process. Our check-in stations, there'll be a kind of secure a safety shield for our poll workers. So there'll be a sneeze guard in front of that roster judge, so that as the poll worker as the voter walks up, there'll be a shield between them and the poll worker. And again, they'll have something else that they can sign in with. And then again, we've made those steps to expand the early vote center as well. So we're taking precautions to make sure that we make voting as safe as possible for those who want to come in person. But again, we want to encourage people to use the mail option because it's safe, it's secure, it works. Our overseas military use it. And again, the nice thing in Ohio is that as long as it's postmarked by the day before Election Day, you've got it as long as it's received within 10 days after the election. So there's plenty of time for the ballot to get to the Board of Elections as long as it's postmarked by the day before election. And then voters always have that option to drop it off here at the Board of Elections. Unfortunately, we don't have multiple drop boxes, but we have, it's the Board of Elections is easy to get to, and people can drop them off here at the board. So they can get them in the mail and they can drop them off here at the board.
Thanks, Ed. And I've got a couple of quick questions for you, just in case you've got to run before we get to the longer Q&A at the end. I think that one of the big things we're trying to talk about the Vote Safe Columbus campaign is, in fact, encouraging people to vote by mail who, have the opportunity to feel comfortable. It's a secure process. I've been telling folks the safest way to vote this year is from your kitchen table. But we know that there's folks that are certainly going to want to, be at the polls on Election Day. Maybe it's just a tradition they have, or they feel like that's the way that they want to access the ballot. So I would be remiss if I didn't give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about recruiting poll workers. I know that's one of the big focus for the Franklin County Board of Elections right now is making sure that there's a sufficient amount of poll workers to make sure that for folks that do show up at the polls that's a orderly process, that we can handle the folks that are there. And I know you've been doing a lot of work to make sure that we have enough folks to do that job. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about how folks can serve their community by being a poll worker.
Well, I always like to remind people that it's not volunteer. So I know you didn't use the word volunteer. They work as a poll worker, is that they get paid to be a poll worker. But again, go to workelectionday.com and they can sign up to be a poll worker. Because again, many of the long lines that you may have seen in the primary, news reports of the primary election in other states, those lines were the result of poll worker shortages. People who called off at the last minute and weren't available. And so we're taking the steps now to make sure that we have enough poll workers in place. And part of that is reassuring the poll workers that we're doing things to have all the cleaning equipment, all the PPE, masks, shields, barriers between the the voters and the poll workers, socially distancing the equipment within the space. The locations where we can't do that, we are kind of putting barriers up between machines to help give some of that distance or that separation between voters. So we're taking steps to make sure that we have all the equipment, gloves, face shields, masks, hand sanitizers. Like I said, the touchless stylus so that people don't have to touch the equipment. But again, to keep both the poll workers safe, but also keep the voters safe, and so that it does run smoothly. Because again, we want to make sure that those voters who choose to show up at the polls, that it's a safe environment for them. But again, we want to encourage people, even if that's always been the tradition, and traditions are great, but it's really most important that people stay safe. And so if you're in a high risk category and you may have had the tradition of going to the polls, this might be the year to start a new tradition. And I'll tell you, once people use vote by mail, again, if they start the process early, they really like it. And I think the Early Vote Center has been a great vehicle for people to exercise that option. And when people use it, they find that they like it, and then they come back. And so I think the same holds true with vote by mail. As people use it, they realize how convenient it is, how easy it is to, hey, if I don't know a candidate, I don't have my ballot card, I can go and get it, or I can get it off the internet and find out, my If I follow a political party, if I subscribe to a political party, then I can get their sample ballot. I can look up candidates. Whereas if you showed up on election day, you don't necessarily have the ability to do that. And so voting by mail is a safe option, and it may be a new tradition this year.
Thanks, Ed. And hopefully we're able to keep you later for some Q&A, but if you got to run, I certainly understand. And
Sure.
I would just like to say, my wife and I, we've made it a point for years to go to the early vote center to vote on election day, because we tend to have a lot of things happen on election day. So it's been a great option for us. And I know this year we're voting by mail because, we want to make sure that we don't contribute to any crowds at any place that may be problematic. So we're doing our civic duty by voting by mail. And Ed, if you just wouldn't mind sharing with us again, both the phone number for the BOE if folks have questions, and also if you don't mind just reminding people of the various deadlines for requesting or for, a voter registration, changing your address, and then for the absentee ballots.
Right. Updating or changing the registration is October 5th, Monday, October 5th. Early vote starts on the next day, Tuesday, October 6th. And so then people have until the official deadline is October 31st to get that application for an absentee ballot to the Board of Elections. But again, we really discourage people waiting and procrastinating to that last minute because understandably, we get the application on noon on October 31st, the Saturday before the election. Getting that ballot in the mail on Saturday, we will get it in the mail on Saturday. Whether you get it there, whether you get it in time to get it back to us is a whole nother matter. So that's why we want to encourage people to request that ballot early. And quite honestly, I'll give you the latest numbers. We are almost at 175,000 people who have requested an absentee ballot from the Board of Elections. That is more absentee ballot requests than we got for all of 2016. So people are taking advantage of it. And so, your neighbors are doing it. And so you ought to do it as well.
Thanks, Ed. And I know my wife and I are in that pile, and we're excited to be able to utilize that voting.
It's not a pile. We kind of but thank you. So.
Yeah. Well, Ed, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing that info. I'm sure we'll have more questions for you if you're able to stick around later. But certainly,
stick around for a bit.
Great.
Thanks.
I know you're a busy man this time of year.
Well, I got another speaking engagement just a little bit. So
great. Well, next I'd like to turn it over to Pam Conrad from the League of Women Voters and Rodney Blunt from the NAACP. And we are also joined by President Nana Watson of the NAACP, and I'm glad that she's able to join us here as well. And certainly we're happy to have her weigh in as well on this next topic, which is the importance of voter registration. I think a lot of people in our community are used to going to various events and seeing people with that clipboard and being able to update their registration or those kinds of things. And that's different this year with the pandemic happening and people's ability to gain access is a little bit different. So wanted to turn the mic over to Pam Conrad, and then we'll hear from Rodney Blunt from the NAACP about what they're doing this year to focus on voter registration and voting, and sort of the history around this and how folks can get involved. Because I think one of the things we want to do during this Vote Safe campaign is not only, as I said earlier, if you're tuning in tonight, you're engaged, you know your rights, you know how to exercise your franchise. But I think we really want to make sure that we're giving people the tools to take back to their family and their friends and their community. And certainly the League of Women Voters and the NAACP are two organizations that are very focused on empowering people to do that right in their community. So with that, Pam, why don't you take it away? And I think our staff is going to get your PowerPoint up here and running. So
right. Thank you, Rob, very much. The League of Women Voters deeply appreciates City Council's invitation to participate in this town hall, this very innovative town hall. We thank you for that. Aaron's going to run my slides for me. I apologize that you can't see my face. You're not missing all that much. I'm having a computer glitch. The slides are the important thing. And thank you, Aaron, for pulling up the first one. Can you go to the second one, please? So for those who may not be familiar with the League of Women Voters, we've been around since the year before the passage of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution that granted women the right to vote. We are one of the most respected, trusted, nonpartisan sources of information about all things that have to do with helping people understand how to participate in their American government, and certainly voting is a key part of that. As Rob mentioned, you probably know us for our voter registration drives and candidate forums. We are the publishers of the voter information bulletin that you get in the Columbus Dispatch every election. We do election day phone banking with WBNS, and we have our one-stop shopping site for all information you can possibly hope for about the upcoming election at vote411.org. Can you give me the next slide, please? So some of the things that we're doing in the local community, there it is. It's a little bit hard for you to see this, but basically this is a list, a partial list of just some of the things that we're doing around the community to try to make sure that everyone has the information that they need this year to vote, since interest is so high. But in many cases, the people that we're talking to are people who are not regular voters. So they're not familiar with the rhythms, they're not familiar with the timetables. It's very important that we get this word out. We're doing virtual lessons for the Columbus City School seniors. We've put voter information advice into the hands of every single Meals on Wheels client. Our most recent project is that COTA has come to us and asked if we will develop COTA bus signs with barcodes on them to give people instant information about how to register and vote, and they can stand right there in the bus or sit if they prefer, and actually register to vote by using that barcode that's going to appear on a sign in front of them. So we're very happy about that. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I can't reiterate enough what Director Leonard mentioned about registering to vote. If you don't get properly registered to vote by October the 5th, none of the rest of this matters. Okay, if you are not registered to vote properly by October the 5th, you can't vote, period. So we stress highly to everyone that we meet. Certainly considerations having to do with absentee ballot choices are very important to think about, but step one is double check your voting registration to make absolutely certain it's up to date. It's now so easy to do. It only takes 20 seconds to check your voter registration. You can do it either at voteohio.gov, which is the Secretary of State site that Ed mentioned, or you can go to the League of Women Voters site. It's just as quick at vote411.org. That's the word you should be spreading to everybody that you know between now and October the 5th. Can you give me the next slide, Aaron? So the city asked us to talk a little bit about why should we vote? Why is it important to vote? You certainly can make all of the good government appeals that are so traditional. For example, I mean, you've probably all seen these quotes. The one from Abraham Lincoln is perfect. You know, if they decide to turn their backs on the fire and burn their behinds, then they will just have to sit on their blisters. We've certainly seen the quote that says that Americans are more likely to be willing to cross the ocean to fight for democracy, but less likely to cross the street to cast a vote. These are things we need to overcome, right? Can I have the next slide? Here's another couple of very familiar quotes that you've probably all seen before. So these are all the standard good government reasons why you have, you know, the patriotic, you're appealing to everybody's sense of patriotic duty to do this. But if you go to the next slide, another good reason, especially for women to consider this, is that it took women more than 75 years to get the right to vote in the United States. The suffragettes who fought during those 75 years for the right to vote for women were ridiculed. They were divorced by their husbands. They were threatened with having their children taken away from them. They were put in jail, and they were even assaulted for having the audacity to think that women should be given the vote. This is certainly a compelling reason why any woman should think twice if she decides not to cast her sacred right to vote. Can you give me the next slide? But after the patriotic appeals are made, what we find is the individual attitudes toward voting tend to be the most difficult obstacles. Now, this is certainly in addition to structures that make it difficult to vote, and we all know what those are. And I'm sure that the folks who follow me on this platform are going to talk about those concerns, but some of them are just strictly personal. I don't know where to vote. I don't know who to vote for. This is a really common complaint, right? People may know that there's an election for president of the United States. They may even know that there's an election for 2 Supreme Court justices in Ohio, but they may know nothing about what else is on the ballot. So there now are great tools available both from the Secretary of State, from Franklin County, and from the League of Women Voters and other organizations to find out exactly what's going to be on your ballot. And you can do that before you ever have to worry about either entering the voting place or marking your ballot. Here's a common one. If I register to vote, I'm going to get called to jury duty. Well, guess what? In Ohio, jurors are pulled from a lot of different lists than just the voter registration list. They're also pulled from the driver's license records and tax rolls too. So it's very likely that you're in the quote unquote jury pool anyway. So not voting is not going to protect you from that. Another common complaint is I'm going to get labeled as either a Dem or a Republican. You can't be labeled as a Democrat or a Republican or anything else just by registering to vote. The only way that attaches to your name is if you elect a partisan ballot in a primary election. That's not the case here. In November, we're going to have a general election. It shouldn't be a concern on anybody's part. That they get labeled as either a Democrat or a Republican. But here's my favorite, and I think that this is sometimes the impediment to voting that's the least well articulated because it's so personal, right? I've never voted before. I don't know how. So there are thousands and thousands of people out there in this category who, honestly, they may give another reason for why they don't want to vote, but they really don't want to vote because they don't know how to do it and they're too intimidated to ask. There are now great tools out there to solve that problem. At the Secretary of State site at voteohio.gov, you click on sample ballot, and when it's timely, you can see everything that's on your ballot. The League has extensive high school training programs. We work with the Girl Scouts. We provide teacher tools, and we do a lot of things to try to help people learn how to vote even before they're eligible to do it. So can I get the next slide, please? How to get involved. So if you want to reach above and beyond to try to help your neighbors, as the councilman mentioned, there are several ways through the League of Women Voters alone that you can do this. I want to jump down to the bottom. As Ed mentioned, the state is, I'll call it desperate for poll workers because a lot of the older poll workers are concerned about being at the poll for a long period of time in this pandemic situation. So if you are not in a high risk category, or if you feel like your immune system's in good shape, we urge you to be a poll worker, even if you've never done it before. It's a thrilling experience to participate in your democracy that way. I heartily encourage it. Other things to do can be virtual. The League of Women Voters offers all this list. If you go to our website at lwvcols.org, You will see a list of things to do. You should sign up for our e-voter newsletter, and that will give you options for even more things to do. Some of them you can do right from the safety of your own home. Can I have the next slide, please? So in essence, the vote411.org site is unique because it presents you with information not just about the issues that are going to be on your ballot, but some nonpartisan, independently sourced, objective information about that in terms of pros and cons of each issue. It also gives you information that comes directly from each candidate for office that they author themselves to make the appeal for why you should vote for them. So in addition to giving you the sample ballot information like the Secretary of State's office does, you have a wealth of additional information about what's going on in your own precinct, your own polling place, your own county or jurisdiction. The league also publishes a wealth of voter information sheets specialized to how to register the homeless, how to register people who may have felony convictions on their records. By the way, you can, as long as you're not currently incarcerated for that felony, you can vote, even if you have a prior conviction, but you must re-register to do that. We have special information sheets about other types of socially underserved populations that need to be reached out to make sure they're included in the voting process. And we also have voting 1, 2, 3 cards that you can slip right into your pocket and contains pretty much all the information you need to know exactly how to vote. With that, I will say, if you go to the final slide, you know, when it comes to voting, let's do this. And I'll be happy to turn this over to Nana Watson, I believe is the next person on the list.
No, it is not. This is Nana, but it's Rodney Blunt. He'll be.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. I let the young people hand it over to young people.
Thank you for joining us, President Watson. Mr. Blunt, would you like to take it from here?
Yes, I'm not sure if my video is showing. It's also been having some glitches here. And I'm glad to hear the president on. I know that if there's anything that I missed out on it, because we're doing so much, she will have my back and be able to answer there. And I really, a lot of what has been mentioned is a lot of what we've been doing. I appreciate the comments from Ed Leonard and Pam Conrad, because the biggest thing that we are making sure that we do is letting people know that their vote counts, that their vote matters. And this is especially true for this election. When we've heard it at different elections before that, oh, you know, it's the same thing that's going to happen, my vote doesn't count. And we can point to different periods in recent history and show that one vote, couple of votes can make a whole lot of difference when it comes to who is put into office and how it affects their daily lives. So I want to give you a brief history about the NAACP, but also some of the history behind how it started and why it's still relevant today, and why we're so passionate about voting and making sure that everybody not only has an equal right to vote, but know what their voting rights are. The NAACP, also known as the National Association for the Colored People, was founded in 1909. This was founded to respond to the ongoing violence against Black people around the country. It is nonpartisan. nonpartisan organization. Most preeminent at the ballot box. Very few were, at the time, primarily African American men were able to vote, and that was really stemming from any type of enfranchisement occurred in 1870 with the passing of the 14th and 15th Amendments for voting rights. Unfortunately, in civil rights and due process, but unfortunately, after the end of Reconstruction, black codes and other laws were put into place that were preventing the majority of the African American population to vote, whether it was through poll taxes or literacy tests that precluded a lot of the population from voting. So there's been an ongoing struggle with the NAACP being formed, bringing lawsuits for activating the community to make sure that they know that they have rights, that there is a due process that they can go through to make sure that our communities are represented on all levels of government. And one of the things that we are glad to have locally, the Columbus unit. They've been helping with the NAACP, but also the whole community for over 100 years. And our most active committees, one of them is the Political Action Committee, and we also have Youth Council and several other committees. And we have done several things over the years. Most recently, we've had a voter registration campaign. We've partnered with churches, and I want to also thank the pastor of Trinity Baptist Church, who I believe is still on the line, Reverend Victor Davis, because we meet currently there. I want to thank him for allowing us there. We partner and let them know that we have information where their parishioners can know where to vote, how to vote, trying to dispel any type of misinformation about voting by mail. It's important that we register, as has been mentioned previously, as early as possible, and not only register, but making sure that everything is turned in on time when it comes to the fulfilling their signatures, making sure that everything is filled out correctly, and so that if there is something that is not printed out correctly or that's not put correctly on their registration form, that there's enough time that they can receive it back to make any type of corrections. We also have a few campaigns that we are doing on both the national level and the local level. One of them are reaching out to young people, and as our president says, she's very supportive of making sure that young people are put out front and center. That means having communication that is up to date. And I'm glad under her leadership, we have updated our Facebook and as well as our Instagram accounts. One of the things that catches the eye of a lot of the young men and women are hashtag campaigns. So we have a Stay Woke, hashtag Stay Woke and Vote campaign from the national level that is something that will lead them to our website, which is the NAACP.org. And there it talks about it's time to getting out to vote. It talks about the NAACP using its voice and strength for real change. But this includes not just at the ballot box, but what it affects is change in our schools, change in our police departments, and change at our state capitals and in Congress. We believe that the voting rights that we are asking for affects all levels of government, from local, state, and national level. And we are here to make sure that not only are we informing people of their right to vote with hashtag campaigns, especially our young people, but giving them the resources to get to that voting more easily. So in addition to NAACP.org, if you go there, there's also registration forms. Links that have previously been shared, like vote.org, are specifically to their states. Here, we have ohiovote.org to help them find where their polling locations are. In addition to that, particularly for the local unit, we have candidate forums that we have sponsored over the years, and we have some that are upcoming where we're inviting everybody to view virtually and social distancing, of course, but to see who is running and to be able to see for themselves who will be impacting their lives in the political arena.
I think we may have lost the connection with Rodney, but I think since we have President Watson with us, I want to give her a moment to share some of her thoughts on sort of the engagement that the group's been working on in less than ideal conditions to make sure that folks will understand their rights and certainly their ability to access the franchise this fall. President Watson, or can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And Councilperson Dorrance, thank you so much for the invitation to participate. We are partners with the city of Columbus, and everyone has got to vote in this upcoming election. So thank you. Last evening, we did a webinar for the community on how to fill your absentee ballots out. So Pam, we did that. And I think it's going to be on our Facebook. And I believe that the slides that were shown last evening will be available to individuals who follow us on Facebook. So we're trying very, very hard to make sure that every vote counts.
Yard signs that it might.
Oh, go ahead, Rodney. I'm good. You're back.
I think we had him for just a moment, President Watson, but I think he's out again. President Watson, would you mind talking about that a little bit? That is really, really great that you were going through that, because I know, I have voted by mail a couple of different times. Normally I go vote early in person. But when you get that envelope in the mail, there's a little bit of paperwork you need to fill out, and you sort of need to, dot all the I's and cross all the T's. And since you just went through that webinar last night, would you mind sharing with folks that may be watching a couple of things that to focus on to make sure they get that process right?
Well, I think the key thing is what you said, Councilman Dorrance, that they've got to be very thorough in filling out their application. They just have to go over it with a fine-tooth comb, if you will, because if not, it's going to be rejected. And here we go again from the very beginning. So it was very elementary on the way that individuals should fill out the forms. There were questions and answers based on things that we learned from individuals with the absentee ballot. I think the concern for the NAACP is senior citizens. We need to make sure that our seasoned citizens understand how to fill that out, because many do not have computers. And we've been reaching out to organizations that provide services to our seasoned citizens to make sure that they understand. And I don't know about the stamps, but I do know NAACP does have some stamps. I did hear that Secretary of State was talking about stamps. Well, I'm just going to not comment on that, but I know that we're going to have stamps, and we will make those available to seasoned citizens so they can get their vote mailed. Does that help?
It does. And I think to underscore one of the points that you made, President Watson, is that and you'll probably agree with this assessment. I think when I voted by mail, I've found someone smarter than me to check that paperwork, and that's typically my wife. So, if you've got someone in your household, a family member, friend, that, hey, just another set of eyes on that does not hurt.
Because I live in a community where there's seasoned citizens, and I make sure, at least I'm making every attempt to make sure that my neighbors who are seasoned citizens understand how to fill out the form. And that's not to discount their intelligence, but this is rather new. Seasoned citizens are accustomed to going to the polls. We're accustomed to being poll workers, and this is a big change for not only Columbus, but for the entire country. So we've got to make sure everybody's vote counts, and we're willing to go to any length to make that happen. I did have a conversation with Charles Hillman, the CEO of Columbus Metropolitan Housing. trying to work on how we can get into the housing developments to make sure that the residents there are registered to vote. And that means if we have to go door to door, we're prepared to do that.
And certainly something that, and this is why the NAACP and certainly other folks are such great partners with the city on this nonpartisan campaign, is for us as the city, we interact with citizens a couple of different ways, but having boots on the ground who are out there in communities. If there are folks listening, you think, hey, I belong to this church or this organization, and I'd love to get, just a big pile of voter registration or absentee request forms. You'll reach out to city council and we'll be more than happy to get you some of those forms to make sure that, I know that, half the time I go to print something in my house, my printer doesn't work. So, getting those physical forms out there to people to be able to utilize, I know is going to be a big help for many. So, folks are watching right now and they think, hey, that'd be a really easy thing for me to take 25 or 30 forms to church with me or to, the folks that you interact with. Just, don't hesitate to reach out to council or certainly folks like President Watson and NAACP. And I know we're all very interested in making sure that there's no barrier for folks being able to access the ballot this fall.
And if I might, Councilman Dorrance, if I might, I believe that we're encouraging churches to do a drive-through, and they can get their absentee ballot, and people will be there to assist them. I know Tri-Stone Baptist Church is doing that, and we're encouraging other churches to do the same.
And that is certainly something that the council is looking to partner with folks on. I think those are wonderful events that promote safety, in which folks don't have to gather in mass groups, but people who have access to sort of roll through that drive-through to get the information and resources they need. It's a needed thing, and certainly we're all adapting to this new normal we've got with us right now.
So those are all the comments I have, unless you have some more questions.
I may get to you here when we get to the Q&A, but President Watson, I can't thank you enough for joining us this evening. So, and certainly to both Rodney and Pam from the League of Women Voters for sharing their presentations with us tonight. And both organizations do such great work in Columbus to, again, make sure that folks can access the voting booth, whether that's an actual booth, whether that's an absentee ballot, or certainly early vote as well. So appreciate folks not only being here tonight with us, but also the work they do out in the community. But with that, I'd love to go next to Trevor Brown, the Dean of the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University. Dean Brown is here to talk a little bit about students being able to vote. I can remember when I was at Ohio University, I was like to give a little rivalry here with the Ohio State University. He was first and finest, 1804 versus the Buckeyes here. That's okay. But I had an opportunity when I was a student to be very active on voter registration drives when I was on campus. And, when folks are coming to campus, especially right now, in which a lot of uncertainty, there's some questions about how they can vote as college students, especially when, college students somewhat feel like, they live at home a little bit, but they also live on campus or in the campus areas, and, have questions about how they can, really make sure that their voice is heard in a safe way. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Dean Brown to share a little bit more.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Dorrance. It's a pleasure to be part of this nonpartisan event. It's so important to get accurate information out there and make it available to different populations of voters. I was so tickled to hear President Watson refer to seasoned citizens. I hope that's not trademarked, because I'm going to use that with my parents and get them to get out to vote. So thanks for that fun little quip.
You're welcome.
That's great. So Councilmember Dorrance asked me to come and talk a little bit about student voting. And we're largely, but not exclusively, talking about voters between the ages of 18 and 22, but more broadly up through their late 20s. And as you just heard, we've got two great Ohio universities with that in their title, but lots and lots of universities here in the Franklin County area. So Columbus State, Capital, I'm at Ohio State, Franklin University, Otterbein, Ohio Wesleyan, lots and lots of 2- and 4-year institutions here of higher education. And even though lots of folks are sort of semi-virtual, there's still lots and lots of students living in and around campus in all of those universities. So So before I talk a little bit about how to vote as a student, I thought I might set the table to hopefully inspire the students that are listening or those that have a student in their life to get them off the couch, get them off out from the computer and get them out to either fill out their ballot over the mail or in person. So a brief history of students voting. Historically, the broad age demographic of 18 to 29, about a 10-year period, they are the least likely to vote. In fact, voting patterns really clearly align with age. You are more likely to vote as you become more seasoned, to use President Watson's term. So in the average voting year, between 50 to 55% of the voting eligible population votes. That's over the last 10 plus decades. And that number goes up or down depending on whether we're in a presidential voting year or an off-cycle congressional election. It kind of rises and falls. But the sort of representation of age demographics doesn't change very much at all. So just like overall national trends, on average, since 1986, around 20% of eligible young voters vote in off-cycle congressional elections, with one exception, and that was 2018, when just north of 30% voted. So we are seeing a rise of young people voting, but still they fall much below that national average of around 50%. So since George W. Bush was first elected in 1988, George H.W. Bush in 1988, the percentage of eligible young voters who vote in presidential elections rises from that 20% in those congressional elections that are off cycle to around the mid 30s, all the way up as high as 50% in 2008 during the year that Barack Obama was first elected president. And so when you see young voters surge in terms of their percentage of the electorate, they only really get up to that national average of around 50%. So we got to get that up. So it fell in 2012 in President Obama's reelection campaign to around 40%, and then it ticked up a couple percentage points in 2016 when President Trump was elected. So this compares, just to give you a sense of how young people vote relative to other demographic age groups, this compares to the next age bracket. So this is folks in that 30 to 44-year-old bracket. Those folks have routinely voted at about 50% of their eligible population since 1988 during presidential elections. Gets to a high water mark of around 60% in 2008. Then if we go a little bit higher, ages 45 to 59 and then 60 plus, those populations vote on average above 60% of eligible voters. And in 2004, it hit 70% and it's basically stayed there ever since. So as you get older, you're more likely to vote. So that makes it even more imperative to get young people to vote, because the research also shows that when you vote young, you're more likely to vote in subsequent elections. You get a taste of it, you see the influence you can have, then you're more likely to keep voting. So even more important to get young people involved earlier to make up that gap right now. Now, does it matter? Does it matter if young people vote? Absolutely, it makes a difference. So the highest voter turnout in record in modern era was 57.1% in 2008. And young voters were a huge component of this surge to go above that national average of about 50%. And young people now outnumber baby boomers. So they are a huge voting bloc. When we think of the sort of the generation that has shaped the American electorate over the last 50, 60 years, it's been the baby boomers. Well, now that young population in that 18 to 29 bracket have a tremendous opportunity to influence what happens in our political landscape. And here's a paradox that's always sort of perplexed me. Young voters are the least likely to vote in any given election, but the impact of the decisions that are made in the early years of their voting eligibility are most likely to impact them over the course of their lives. We often think of programs like Social Security or Medicare as programs that only have implications for those that are consuming them right now, the seasoned, the elderly. But the decisions we make about those programs right now will have a great effect on the average young voter because they stand to live longer given rising life expectations. So your expectancies, excuse me, your vote matters not just in who gets elected, but it matters in terms of the types of policies that we implement and the changes to the ones that are on the books. And since we hope, God willing, you're going to live a long, long time, these policies are going to have an impact on you over the course of your life. So most narrowly, though, in the near term, if we're talking about college students, there are a lot of big questions at stake right now, like state support for higher education, affordability and accessibility of college, and policing on college campus. All of these are important issues that are going to be influenced by this coming election. So why don't young people vote? Why isn't it that they don't vote at the same rate of older generations? Well, we heard some of this from Pam Conrad. And some of the same reasons that the average voter doesn't vote also apply to students, but there are also some important distinctions here. First, some have never done it before, like we heard earlier. And like any administrative process, it can be daunting. Am I allowed to vote? How do I register to vote? Where do I go? What else could I be doing right now? So that's a big explanation. It's something that's new, especially if you're 18 or 19 and you've never done it before. You don't quite know how to navigate that system. Second is a lot of young voters don't have information about candidates, about policies, and how these things are going to impact their lives. They're only just starting to become conscious of the impacts of various public policies on their life. They get their first paycheck. Who's this FICA person that takes some money from my paycheck? Why does the state require me when I pass my driver's test that then I have to get car insurance to operate a motor vehicle in Ohio? Why does my community think that we shouldn't be required to wear masks in the midst of the COVID pandemic when out in public across the state there are other communities that do? Why are those things that are different? And so many young people are beginning to sort out which of these issues and others are the ones that matter to them and where they stand on this. And this takes time. So it's hard to see that connection between voting and the impact of those public policies, but it is profound. And so it's important and imperative that we seek ways to communicate how important these policies are to young people and why voting is such an important part of that. Now, the third reason that young people, college people in particular, find voting a challenge is it's hard when your situation isn't stable and you're mobile. And that stability or instability can be a function of your economic situation when you're in college. Maybe you're having to work and go to school and perhaps be involved in a family, either whether you're raising one or just a member of that family. And you're moving around, as we heard Councilmember Doran say. Sometimes you're on campus, sometimes you're off. So when you're in school, you have this sort of unstable existence, and it's hard to know how to navigate that. So let's talk a little bit about what are the specific things that you need to be focused on as a student that's different perhaps than other population when it comes to voting. So you've already heard a lot about voter registration here in Ohio. The one catch for students in 2- and 4-year college programs is that you have a choice about where to register to vote. Students attending college may register at their campus address or to choose to stay registered or register at their permanent or home address, which could be in another state. So as a student, you have a choice here in Ohio about which of those two locations will be your residence for voting. Now, it's important to say that you cannot vote in both places. You have to pick one, but you do have that choice. And as you register to vote by October 5th, it's important to specify which of those addresses you're going to use. Are you going to vote where you are in college, or are you going to vote in your hometown, whether that be someplace else in Ohio or outside of Ohio? There are lots of information out there about what kinds of identification that you need when you go to the polls. You need some kind of ID. Typically, if you're an Ohio resident, your valid photo ID issued by, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles will do it. But if you're from out of state, then often you need to provide a federally issued ID, like a passport or something like that. Or you can use a copy of a current utility bill that shows your address here in the Franklin County area. So be sure to look that you have those pieces of information when you go to register to vote. You have the option of voting by mail, voting in person, if you've heard, so I won't go into that in detail. on your campus, most colleges here in Ohio have a program or programs to try and encourage you to vote and participate in that process, and they can help you navigate. So at Ohio State University, we have OSU Votes, which actively encourages students to vote, encourages them to register to serve as poll workers. We do some of that in the Glenn College. We have hosted in partnership with the Franklin County Board of Elections some poll worker training, and we want to encourage young people to do that in light of the deficit of poll workers that are out there. And so you can just Google, if you're on Ohio State campus, OSU Votes. There are lots of opportunities and ways to get involved. Odds are good on your campus. You can find these things out. Now, if you are a rising college student, in the sense that you are a senior in high school, you may not be old enough to vote, but there's a wonderful program offered by the Franklin County Board of Elections that I want to encourage you to look into, and that is the Youth in the Booth program, which allows you to serve as a poll worker. You train and you get paid, as we heard earlier, and even though you may not be able to vote, you still get to be a part of that electoral process. My oldest daughter did it and loved it, and my youngest daughter, who's a senior in high school right now, is thrilled to be enrolling to do that this fall as well. So even though she can't vote, she can very much be a part of the democratic process. Now, if on your campus you can't find that OSU Votes equivalent, there's a great voter website that I want to encourage you to look out, and that is the Campus Voter Project. So if you Google Campus Voter Project, it breaks down all the voter registration and voting processes by state. So you can go to that website, you can punch in Ohio, and you can see what you need to do to be able to vote. So with that, I'll wrap it up and just offer these words of advice. Register to vote, serve as a poll worker, get informed about the issues and the candidates, and go vote. And thanks again for this opportunity to talk about a really important population of eligible voters who need to exercise that right more often, and that's young students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Brown, and good to hear your pups there in the background. Mine's passed out next to me, so luckily enough, we haven't had any deliveries right now. Otherwise, she'd be barking too.
They get really excited about democracy. They just
That's right.
Really keyed up about voting. They're just passionate.
It's good to hear. One of the things that I want to mention, since we're on the topic of youth voters, and Dean, would love for you to weigh in as well about this if you'd like. When we talk about those three different options for folks to vote early, voting by mail, voting earlier, or voting on election day. Yeah, you talked a little bit about those voter identification requirements that exist. One of the things, when students are they're in a transitional part of life, they may not have all those documents or those IDs readily available. But voting by mail or voting early at the Board of Elections, they don't need those types of IDs you would if you're going to go vote on election day. So certainly for there's still a confirmation process that folks are who they are, in which they're providing their last four digits of their social security number on that absentee ballot. So there's a way in which that's still secure, that we know that the person who's requested the ballot is getting that specific ballot. You have a good identification. Those are great options, especially in a pandemic year, in which those are going to be good options for folks to be able to exercise their vote without potentially being at a crowd on election day. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that, Dean Brown.
Yeah, and thanks for that good clarification. My voter ID requirements for those who want to go vote in person. But one of the things that's great about Ohio State, I don't know if this is true about the other universities that I mentioned earlier, is that OSU Votes and other organizations are helping students to register. And then they have drop boxes across campus, not one, but multiple, many of them connected to the dorms, but two off-campus sites as well, where you can literally just go put that piece of mail in there, and as you say, it's safe and secure, and so you can register very, very easily on campus without having to leave your dorm in certain cases. So the OSU Votes website lists all the locations where OSU Votes will accept those mail-in registration documents.
Thank you, Dean Brown, and I certainly can't compliment you and the Ohio State University enough about your efforts to make sure that your student populace has every opportunity to exercise their right to vote. That's something that we're very proud that so many organizations in our community are trying to do their best under difficult conditions to make sure that folks understand the process. And an institution like Ohio State is helping to lead the way. So thank you for the work that you are doing there.
It's my pleasure. Our motto at Ohio State University is Disciplina in Civitatem, which is education for citizenship. So it's in our blood.
Thank you for that, and thank you for being here tonight. Want to turn to our last speaker tonight, Pastor Victor Davis of Trinity Baptist Church. Pastor Davis, I think one of the things I'm very excited about him being here tonight is really talk about that what's happening, directly in communities right now that are dealing with a pandemic, but also very aware of a very important upcoming election. And no one knows better what is going on in a community and in a neighborhood than a pastor. And that is why I'm very excited for him to be here with us tonight to share a little bit of his perspective, certainly about why it's important for folks in all of our communities and all our neighborhoods to vote, and certainly how that translates to himself as a man of faith, but also what he's hearing from his parishioners about their ability to vote safely this year. So with that, would love to turn the mic over to Pastor Davis.
Thank you, Councilman, and good evening to everyone. It's such a joy to be here on this humid Wednesday afternoon, or evening now. The pandemic has affected all of us in some way, form, or fashion, from our seasoned saints and their lack of ability to fellowship with their families, to our young people not being able to go to school. The church has been charged with continuing to minister to the needs of these people in a new form. Oftentimes, when we think of church, we think of people coming to the building and sitting in a worship center and fellowshipping together. But the pandemic has caused the church to look at ministry in a new way, do ministry virtually, as well as something that we've strayed away from, picking up the phone, calling people, and maybe stopping by and waving from a distance because of safety and social distancing. So you ask, what is the church doing in the pandemic? The church is doing what it's always done, is meeting the needs of people with the resources they have the best way they can. And of course, it's affected all of us, but we're still doing what we can to meet the needs of people that come our way. The phones have not stopped ringing from people that are in need, being laid off, people whose children are at home and they have to make a decision to stay home with their children versus going to school. All of that is a part of our challenges in our community. And then some of our churches, such as Trinity, is opening their doors to partner with agencies such as the Urban League and our school system to provide safe spaces for our youth to be able to hook up to the internet, as well as eat and maybe come somewhere that's safe when they're not able to have those resources in their homes or in other parts of the community. So those are what we're doing. Those are the things that we're doing. As it relates to voting, all of the information that has been rendered tonight has been so valuable, eye-opening, and education to all of us. But the reality of it is, as good as that information is, as liberal as that information has been to all of us, there is still a fear of voting in this community. People want to go to the polls because they don't trust the system right now. With our presidential leadership and the comments that have been made, the challenges with our postal service, there is an aura of mistrust, especially during this election season. So I ditto everything you said. I'm encouraging early ballots. I'm encouraging mail-in ballots. But I'm also encouraging, as a pastor, early voting. And if persons who are able-bodied would make their way to our election board and cast their votes in person early, trusting that the information you've given us early about, that Ed gave us early about distance and PPP and all that being in place, will be in place. As a matter of fact, my church will be sponsoring rides to the polls or souls to the polls We're going to put them on our van, safe space. We've already counted how many persons can be there. And we're going to have days of the week where we'll take people actually to the voting location on Morris Road up until voting day to make sure that people are able to cast their vote in person. Now, me personally, I've done voting everywhere there is to be doing it. But I'm encouraging this year that people try to vote in person in addition to the mail-in voting. Now, as someone said, make sure you only vote once, don't vote twice. But we want people to know that how important this voting year is. Every voting year is important, but the country is at a pivotal point. And the best good trouble you could get in, as John Lewis said, you could go vote and vote the right way and as your conscience leads. Too many women, too many African Americans, too many Jewish Americans, too many white Americans gave their lives for people to have the right to vote in this country. And I, as a pastor, believe that we ought to render unto Caesar what is Caesar, unto God what is God, and voting is a part of our responsibility as good Christian citizens. That's my spiel for tonight.
Thank you, Pastor. I would never call that a spiel. That was one wonderful message for you to share with us. So certainly do not downplay your contributions here this evening. So thank you for being with us and certainly sharing what folks in your community are doing right now, which you have said is, what they always do, seeking to meet the need in certainly the neighborhoods that they live and work and worship in. So, and I think you bring up,
and remember, for a great percentage of our population, they trust the message from the pulpit. So the pulpit has to be just as educated on how to vote, the proper ways to voting, and the information that is given, because people historically, especially in the African American community, got their information about our civil and social justice right from the pulpit.
Couldn't agree with you more, Pastor. And certainly in an era in which disinformation is certainly a polite way to put what a lot of folks encounter on a daily basis about governments, about politics, and unfortunately about our voting system. I think that strikes a good note to end on tonight. Is about seeking out trusted sources to impart upon accessing the ballot. As we started off tonight, this is certainly a nonpartisan campaign that we're running to make sure that folks have the opportunity to make their voice heard, no matter who they support. But I think one of the important things for us to remember as a community is that whether it's the League of Women Voters, whether it's the NAACP, whether it's Ohio State, whether it's Trinity Baptist, whether it's anyone else, we have trusted sources in our community that should be looked towards for leadership in a time like this, in which we're all asking a lot of questions about how to make sure that, again, come this November, we're able to access the ballot in a way that we can make our voices heard, but do so in a way in which we're not putting our personal safety at risk. So that is a wonderful point, Pastor, for us to end on tonight. Certainly want to thank you and everyone else that joined us this evening. Want to remind folks about a couple of things that we've certainly have talked about tonight, and certainly these are the tenets of the Vote Safe Columbus campaign. Our goal is to have a safe and fair election, and I think everything we've talked about tonight, I think, has helped to make sure that folks understand that is well within our grasp. But one thing that's that's very evident tonight that we all need to do in the next 8 weeks leading up to November 3rd is making sure that our friends and neighbors know about what we've discussed. We've had a number of people who've tuned in on this on Facebook, on YouTube, but there are literally hundreds of thousands of other Columbus residents that weren't here with us tonight, and we need folks to be able to take that information back to them. Call, text, email, post on social media, whatever it takes to get folks engaged. And certainly the Vote Safe Columbus campaign is going to be looking at innovative ways to make sure that we're getting the message out with our partners who are here tonight, and many of them that that weren't with us. We've got links to register to vote, update your voter registration, or request an absentee ballot. That'll be on our Facebook page. And certainly want to thank the folks that helped to make this possible tonight. Aaron Gibbons from the City Council Neighborhood Engagement staff, Lee Cole and David Miller from our communications staff, Kevin McCain and Hannah Miller from my staff, Angela Burks and Mark Carter from the clerk and IT staff, and certainly Andy Stout as well. We have created a very, very simple, to the point website for folks to be able to access this information, which is columbus.gov/vote. That'll take you very specifically to the Franklin County Board of Elections for things like voter registration, absentee, all the things we talked about tonight. I'm also going to be following up with President Watson to see if she'd be willing to let us post that webinar that she was talking about earlier, to make sure that folks, if we're getting people to vote by mail, that they certainly know how to do so and make sure they do it right. So if President Watson lets us do that, I'm sure we're going to try and get that up there if we can.
You know, you can have it. I will ask our technology people to send it to you, Councilman Dorans. You know, I technology challenged at some point, but you'll get that.
You're always far too kind and willing to help. So thank you, President Watson. If folks are watching that have specific questions, feel free to give my office a call at 614-645-8201. They can certainly email me personally at radorans, D-O-R-A-N-S, at columbus.gov as well. And again, just want to say thanks to all of our panelists tonight for the important information that they shared. And certainly want to take a moment to encourage people to continue to wear a mask when they are in public. It's not only ordered by the state and the city, but it is literally saving lives. So please, when you're out in public, please wear a mask. That will ensure that all of us can get through this challenging time sooner and safely. So with that, please stay safe in your communities and make a plan to vote safe in Columbus this fall. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.